Robbing a tray of champagne flutes in the penthouse suite of Montreal's most exclusive hotel was, under normal circumstances, a fireable offense. Under Callum Voss's circumstances, it was supposed to be a death sentence. It turned out to be neither. It turned out to be the beginning of everything. The Hotel Voss occupied the top 6 floors of a glass and granite tower in Old Montreal, overlooking the St. Lawrence like a king surveying conquered territory. Which was appropriate, because Callum Voss was exactly that, 41 years old, silver-streaked dark hair, a jaw sharp enough to cut the imported crystal he served his guests in. He wore charcoal kitten suits and kept his cufflinks from his father's collection, which was the only soft thing about him. He ran Voss Hospitality Group as a legitimate empire. Hotels, restaurants, a private members club in Westmount. He also ran the most disciplined, organized crime network in Quebec, though that particular line item didn't appear in the annual report. 3 rival families had tried to move into his territory in the past decade. None of them had tried twice. His hotel staff turnover was legendarily brutal. Not because he screamed. Callum Voss never screamed. He simply looked at people, and they understood they were not enough, and they left. 4 banquet supervisors in 8 months. A head concierge who'd lasted 11 days before requesting a transfer to the Halifax property. The executive housekeeper who'd managed 2 full weeks before submitting her resignation in tears over a single misfolded turned-down towel. Into this environment, on a grey Tuesday in October, walked Wren Kowalski. Wren was 26 years old, 5'4", and somewhere in the neighborhood of 270 pounds, depending on whether she'd stress-eaten her way through a bag of ketchup chips the night before, which, given that she'd just been evicted from her Rosemont apartment, she had. She had dark circles under her eyes, a uniform that pulled across her shoulders because the hotel had run out of size 18s and handed her a 16 with an apologetic shrug, and a rolling cart that she had not yet learned responded poorly to sharp corners. The staffing agency had sent her to Voss. They had not mentioned who Voss was. They had mentioned repeatedly that the hourly rate was exceptional. Her first hour on the job involved successfully delivering room service to 4 floors, accidentally learning 3 words of Mandarin from the guest in 4208, and developing a genuine affection for the service elevator, which was wide and forgiving and didn't judge her when she needed a moment to breathe. Her first encounter with Callum Voss happened at 7:43 p.m. during the Duplessis Group private reception on the 42nd floor. Wren had been assigned to champagne. She was good with champagne in theory. In practice, the 42nd floor event space had a threshold between the service corridor and the main room, a small, raised brass lip, purely decorative, completely pointless, approximately 1 centimeter high. Wren's left foot found it with the kind of precision that her feet reserved exclusively for the worst possible moments. The tray went. The flutes went. The champagne went, in a spectacular, sparkling cascade, directly onto the back of a man in a charcoal suit who had been standing at the edge of the corridor speaking in low, measured tones to a man with the build of a refrigerator and the eyes of something that lived in cold water. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Wren stood in the wreckage of 8 crystal flutes and approximately $400 of 2015 Taitinger, and she did the only thing she could think to do. "Oh, fudge nuggets," she whispered. "Oh, no. Oh, I am so sorry. I am genuinely from the bottom of my entire soul sorry. I will pay for the dry cleaning. I will pay for the glasses. You can take it directly out of my paycheck. I haven't gotten my first one yet, but I will absolutely. Are you okay? Did any of it get your shoes?" "It got your shoes, didn't it?" "Of course it got your shoes." Callum Voss turned around slowly. He looked at the champagne dripping from his jacket. He looked at the destroyed glassware on the floor. He looked at the woman in the too small uniform with the rolling cart and the expression of a person who was genuinely, actively considering whether she could fit behind the drinks table and wait until everyone left. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "What's your name?" Not a question, a summons. "Wren Kowalski. I started today. I want you to know I have never done this before. I mean, I have dropped things before, I won't lie to you. But not like this. Not on someone. Not on She looked at his suit jacket and made a small sound like a wounded animal. Not on Italian wool. The man beside Callum, the refrigerator-built one, had his hand inside his jacket. Wren noticed this and decided not to think about what that meant. Callum continued looking at her. His expression had not changed. It was not angry exactly. It was assessing, the way a man who has been lied to by experts studies someone who appears, bafflingly, to be entirely incapable of deception. "Go back to the service corridor," he said finally. "Get the dustpan. Clean up the glass before someone cuts themselves. And then I'm fired. And then you finish your shift." Wren blinked. "That's okay, yes, absolutely. I'll just..." She pointed at the mess, then at the corridor, then back at the mess, then retreated. Behind her, she heard the refrigerator man say in a low voice, "You're not going to." "No," Callum said, "I'm not." Surviving the first shift was improbable. Surviving the first week required divine intervention and a willingness to apologize to inanimate objects, which Wren had in abundance. By Wednesday, she had knocked over a display of hand-tied amaryllis in the lobby. She apologized to the flowers individually. By Thursday, she had jammed the service elevator with her cart for 40 minutes, trapping herself and a very patient sous chef named Gerard, who taught her 3 Quebecois swear words while they waited for maintenance. By Friday, she had somehow, while trying to retrieve a dropped pen, accidentally unplugged the router powering the executive floor's communication system for 11 minutes. This last one had caused a problem. During those 11 minutes, an encrypted call from a business associate in Vancouver had failed to connect. The associate, a cautious man, had interpreted the dropped communication as a signal and had gone to ground. It had taken Callum's people 4 hours to re-establish contact and confirm that no, there was no problem. Yes, the shipment timeline stood. No one needed to do anything drastic. Wren had not known any of this. She had plugged the router back in, said, "Oh, that was probably important, sorry," to no one in particular, and gone back to folding napkins. What they had not anticipated, what no one had anticipated, was that Wren was, beneath the catastrophic exterior, preternaturally good at her actual job. Her room service ratings were the highest on the floor within 5 days. Not because she was fast, she wasn't. She took the slow elevator to avoid the cart-tipping risk on the steep service ramp. But because she remembered things. She remembered that the woman in 3814 had mentioned her daughter's piano recital and asked about it when she brought the morning coffee. She remembered that the elderly man in the corner suite preferred his newspaper folded twice, not once, and that he liked to talk about his late wife for exactly as long as he needed to, and then preferred to be left alone with dignity. She remembered the name of the guest's dog that had visited 3 weeks before she'd even started, because she'd overheard it mentioned once and filed it away without knowing why. It was this quality, the noticing, the remembering, that brought her into Callum's orbit in a way that champagne-soaked cuffs alone would not have sustained. It happened on the Thursday of her second week. She was restocking the minibar trolley on 39 when she overheard 2 men talking in the corridor. She wasn't eavesdropping. She was simply existing, quietly, behind her cart, and they hadn't noticed her because people rarely noticed her when she was being careful. "Remy's been skimming the private events budget," one of them said. 15% minimum, maybe more. Been doing it since August. Does Voss know? Not yet. Wren did not know who Remy was, but she did know she'd been reconciling the event supply orders against delivery manifests all week. It was part of the banquet coordinator role she'd been filling in for since the actual banquet coordinator had fled to Toronto for reasons no one would specify. And she had noticed the numbers didn't line up. She had assumed she was doing the math wrong. She had checked it 4 times. She wasn't doing the math wrong. She spent her break writing it out on a piece of hotel notepaper. Dates, amounts, vendor codes, the specific line items where the discrepancy appeared. The total she arrived at was $43,000 over 4 months. She stared at it for a while. She chewed on her pen cap, then she folded the paper, went to the 40th floor, and knocked on the closed office door. "Come," said the voice inside. Callum Voss was at his desk reviewing something that looked like a shipping manifest but had notations in a shorthand she didn't recognize. He looked up. "I think one of your event managers has been stealing from you," Wren said. Her voice was doing the shaking thing it did when she was nervous, which was often, but she kept it loud enough to be heard. "I'm sorry to just show up. I knocked. You said, 'Come.' I came. Here." She put the paper on his desk. "I pulled the vendor reconciliation going back to August because I couldn't figure out why the numbers were off. They're off because someone's been inflating the vendor invoices and pocketing the margin. It's $43,000, give or take, but I might be wrong. I'm not an accountant. I'm a Banquet fill-in who started 8 days ago." Callum looked at the paper. He looked at it for a long time. "You found this," he said. The math wasn't hiding very hard. But to be fair, I did check it 4 times because I thought I was wrong. Remy has been with this hotel for 7 years. I know, I looked him up in a staff directory. He has a very nice headshot." She paused. "I'm not saying that's relevant." Callum set the paper down. He looked at her with the same assessing expression he'd worn the night of the champagne. As if she were a species he hadn't catalogued yet and couldn't decide whether to tag and release or study further. "Sit down," he said. "I'm okay standing." "Sit down, Wren." She sat. He used her first name the same way he issued all instructions, as a settled matter, not a request. It was a strange thing, hearing her name in his voice. It fit differently than she'd expected. He asked her to walk him through the reconciliation. She did. He asked her 3 follow-up questions that were sharp and specific and assumed a level of financial literacy she wasn't sure she had, but she answered them anyway based on what she'd seen. He took notes. At the end, he was quiet for a moment. "Go finish your shift," he said. "And Remy?" "I'll handle Remy." Rennie was not at work on Friday. He was not at work the following Monday. His name was removed from the staff directory with the quiet efficiency of a document being shredded. Wren did not ask what had happened to him. She had a feeling the answer existed in a space she wasn't equipped to inhabit yet. What she was equipped for was her job, which she continued to do with a combination of genuine competence and spectacular physical misfortune. The men who worked the private floors, quiet men who wore good suits and said little and had the posture of people who are accustomed to making decisions about other people's well-being, began to work around her. Not avoiding her, exactly. More like accommodating her the way experienced sailors accommodate a tricky current. You learn where it runs, you factor it in, you stop fighting it. A man named Sebastien, who had the build of a defensive lineman and the energy of a very calm library, started holding the service corridor doors open for her when her card was full. Another one, she'd heard him called Tiervy, had, without comment, placed a small strip of bright orange tape over the brass threshold on 42, the one that had started everything. She had seen it and felt something complicated and warm in her chest. There was a box of Poussard L'Oréal pastries from the Laurier Avenue bakery on her cart twice a week. They had not been ordered through the system. No one mentioned them. Wren ate them and did not ask. She was aware, in the way that someone is aware of a tide coming in, slowly, then suddenly, that Callum Voss was paying attention to her. Not in a way that alarmed her, in a way that felt like being studied by someone who had stopped expecting to find anything surprising in the world and was recalibrating. He would appear in the corridor when she was working the late service, not doing anything in particular, just present. He'd ask her something practical, how a particular guest had seemed, whether she'd noticed anything unusual on 37, if the morning delivery had come in on time. And she would answer honestly, including the parts where the answer was, "I don't know. I was busy apologizing to a lamp I walked into." He asked questions the way he looked at the shipping manifests, like he was building a picture from a lot of small data points, and she happened to be providing unusually good data. She thought about quitting. She thought about it seriously, on the subway home, sitting in her new apartment in Verdun that she could now afford because of the hotel's astonishing pay scale. She was not naive. She had grown up in a small town outside of Sudbury, and then spent 4 years in Montreal, working 3 jobs to pay for a business administration certificate she hadn't quite finished. And she understood, at some level, that the men who held doors for her and the orange tape on the brass threshold and the pastries that appeared from nowhere all existed within a structure that had nothing to do with hospitality. She stayed anyway. She was not sure she could have explained exactly why, except that it was the first place she had ever worked where no one had once made her feel as though her size was something she needed to apologize for. Not one comment, not one look, and Callum, when he looked at her, it was not with the evaluating, dismissive, or occasionally predatory gaze she had spent her whole life navigating. It was direct, specific, like she was, simply, a person worth paying attention to. 3 weeks in, the thing she had been not quite admitting to herself crashed directly into the thing she had been not quite noticing, and neither of them came out of it unscathed. It was a Wednesday afternoon in November, sleet sheeting against the lobby windows, when Wren stepped outside to take a call from her mother. She drifted half a block from the hotel entrance, absorbed in the conversation. Her mother was fine. Her brother's kid had a cold, nothing urgent, just the warm, ordinary static of family. And she turned down a side street to get out of the foot traffic. The van appeared quickly. Black, unmarked, no plates. The side door opened before it had stopped moving. There were 3 of them. She thought she was not a small woman and she was not a passive one, and she caught the first one across the shin with her heel hard enough that he swore in 3 languages. But 3 was too many, and the street was empty, and the sleet meant no one was lingering to see. She woke up cold. Concrete floor, the smell of river water and old diesel. Her wrists were bound behind her with zip ties which she'd seen on a true crime show once, and knew were worse than rope. And she was sitting in a metal chair in a space that was clearly meant to be intimidating. Old warehouse, South Shore from the sound of the freeway, rain on a metal roof. She's awake. The man who stepped into the light was compact and well-dressed in the cheap, aggressive way of someone who'd acquired money recently and hadn't yet developed taste. He had a phone in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and he looked at her with the pleased expression of someone who believed they had thought of something clever. His name, she would learn later, was Duval. Claude Duval. He ran a distribution network out of Laval that had been trying, with limited success, to establish a foothold in old Montreal for 2 years. He had, his people told him, identified a vulnerability. "You're Voss's girl," he said. "I'm a hotel employee," Wren said. Her voice was shaking. She let it shake. She'd learned that pretending not to be frightened just made her sound strange. "I spilled champagne on him once. I'm pretty sure he's forgotten I exist." Word is, he hasn't. Duval crouched in front of her, studying her with the curious contempt of someone who'd expected the leverage to be more impressive. Word is, he watches out for you. That's interesting to me, because, no offense, you're not exactly what I'd expect. "None taken," Wren said flatly. "And not what I'd expect either." Duval laughed, which she hadn't anticipated. He straightened up and dialed a number, held the phone toward her. It rang once. Duval. Callum's voice came through the speaker flat and cold as February ice. Not a greeting. An acknowledgement. The way you acknowledge the presence of something that needs to be dealt with. "I have your housekeeper." "Banquet coordinator," Wren said. A pause. Then, very quietly through the phone, "Wren. Hi, I'm fine. He has bad taste in suits and his warehouse smells like low tide, but I'm not hurt." Silence from the phone. A different kind of silence than before. She could hear, at the edge of it, something that sounded like a long, slow exhale through a closed jaw. "Don't do anything stupid, Duval," Callum said. "You're already out of moves you don't know you've played." Duval took the phone back. He talked about terms, territory, a percentage of the port logistics, access to something Wren didn't understand and didn't try to. She stopped listening because she was looking at the chair she was sitting in. It was a metal folding chair, the kind you could find stacked in the back of any church hall or community center in Quebec. It was old, and one of the back legs had a stress fracture in it. She could feel every time she shifted her weight. She knew this about herself, 273 pounds as of last Tuesday's weigh-in at the clinic on St. Denis. She had spent her whole life understanding, in a dozen unconscious ways, how her body interacted with furniture that wasn't designed for it. This chair was not going to hold. She waited until the guard near the door had drifted to the far wall to check his phone. She waited until Duval was turned halfway away, still talking. Then she shifted her weight hard to the left, leaned forward, and threw herself backward with everything she had. The chair didn't just break. It disintegrated. The fractured leg gave first, then the seatpan buckled, and Wren hit the concrete floor with an impact that knocked the wind completely out of her and sent the zip ties snapping against the edge of the broken frame with enough force to split the plastic. The guard yelled and started toward her. Wren, gasping, got her hands free, grabbed the longest piece of broken chair frame, a good 18 inches of powder-coated steel, and swung it sideways at shin height as the guard reached her. His knee buckled. He went down. She scrambled upright. Duval had the phone down and a gun up, but he was 3 seconds behind her, and she was already moving, putting a support column between them, her heart hammering so loud she could barely hear him shouting at the remaining men. She didn't make it to the door. She didn't need to. The wall came in first, not literally, but close enough. The loading bay doors blew inward under the impact of something large and fast, and the room went from quiet threat to absolute chaos in under 4 seconds. There were men in dark gear moving with a coordination that had nothing casual about it, and Callum Voss was among them, not behind them, not directing from a distance. He moved like someone who had done this before and found it neither exciting nor regrettable. Simply necessary. It was over before she had fully processed that it had started. Duval was on the floor with Sebastian's knee on his back. The guard with the broken leg was not moving. The others had made the correct calculation about their odds. Callum crossed the warehouse toward her. His jacket was gone, his shirt was dark at the collar from the rain, and he was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not the assessing look, not the settled, managerial calm, something that had come up from underneath all of that without his permission. He stopped in front of her. His eyes went to the zip tie still hanging from one wrist, to the broken chair frame she was still holding, to the guard on the floor, and back to her face. "You got yourself free," he said. "The chair had a stress fracture. I noticed it." She set the chairpiece down carefully. "I broke his leg a little bit. His knee. I'm sorry. Don't apologize to him. It's a reflex." He reached out and took her wrist, the one with the zip tie, and worked the plastic loose with careful, deliberate fingers. He didn't let go right away. "Duval hit you." His thumb moved to her cheekbone, where she'd taken an elbow during the grab and hadn't quite registered the sting until now. "One of his people. Getting me into the van. It's fine." Callum's jaw shifted. His hand stayed gentle, which was at odds with everything happening behind his eyes. "I should fire you," he said, "for going out alone." The policy memo didn't mention a buddy system. It does now. His thumb moved again, the smallest motion. "You found a $43,000 discrepancy in 8 days. You broke out of a kidnapping with a folding chair. You remember the name of every guest's dog." "I have a good memory," she said. "It's a low-rent superpower." "Wren." "Yeah. I'm not going to apologize for what I am." She looked at him. The warehouse smelled like river water, gunpowder, and rain. Sebastian was speaking quietly into a phone somewhere behind them. Outside, she could hear the freeway. "I know what you are," she said. "I've known for about 2.5 weeks. And—" she exhaled. "And I'm still here." He kissed her then, or she kissed him. She was never entirely sure, afterward, how that particular physics had worked. His hand cupped her jaw, and her cold fingers found the lapel of his shirt. And it was not a gentle kiss, but it was careful. The way someone is careful with something they have decided matters very much. When he pulled back, he kept his forehead against hers. "You are a liability," he said quietly. "You are a walking insurance claim. You have jammed my elevator, knocked out my communications grid, and destroyed $4,000 worth of glassware." "3,000, she said. I looked up the invoice. "You are," he continued, ignoring her, "the only person in this building who has never once lied to me." She didn't have an answer for that. She just let him hold her face in his large, careful hands while the rain continued on the metal roof, and Sebastian very professionally pretended to be looking at something interesting in the opposite direction. Back in old Montreal, Things settled into a new shape. The orange tape stayed on the threshold. The pastries kept appearing. Wren's cart was quietly upgraded to a model with wider wheels and a lower center of gravity. And no one mentioned why. The men on the private floors, Sebastian, Thierry, the others whose names she learned over weeks and months, treated her with a consideration that was, she understood, not required of them, and therefore meant something. She still tripped over things. She still apologized to furniture. She dropped a full coffee service on the 38th floor in December, sending a perfectly good pot of Kenyan dark roast across the corridor in a magnificent arc, and stood in the wreckage and said, "Oh, for the love of Tim Hortons," loudly enough to be heard from the service elevator, which she was fairly sure was now considered a term of endearment. She still reconciled the vendor accounts on Thursday afternoons. She still remembered the names of every dog. And when Callum Voss looked at her across a room, across his polished desk, across the 42nd floor event space, across the wreckage of whatever she had most recently, accidentally, destroyed, it was with the expression of a man who had run a precise and careful empire for 2 decades and had not expected, at 41, to discover that precision was considerably less interesting than chaos, provided the chaos came in the form of a woman in a too small uniform who remembered everything, apologized to everything, and was quietly, stubbornly, entirely herself. He had built an empire of imported marble and encrypted ledgers and controlled violence. She had broken into it with a rolling cart and a good memory and the remarkable structural integrity of a spirit that had never once been told it was enough and had decided, quietly, to be enough anyway. That, more than anything, was what he could not get over. That was what he had not expected. That was what he did not intend to lose. I've thought about Wren a lot since finishing this story. Not the dramatic parts, not the warehouse, not the broken chair, not the kiss in the middle of all that wreckage. I keep thinking about the Thursday afternoon she spent her break writing out vendor codes on hotel notepaper. Nobody asked her to. Nobody would have known if she hadn't. She could have looked at those numbers, decided they weren't her problem, and gone back to folding napkins. She had enough going on. She was new, she was broke. She was sleeping in a Verdun apartment she could barely afford, and she'd already had a rough enough week without adding uncover an embezzlement scheme to her list. But she checked it 4 times anyway. That's the part I can't stop thinking about. There's something that happens when you act with that kind of quiet integrity. When you do the right thing not because someone's watching, but because it's the right thing. And I think the story of Wren and Callum is really a story about that cause and effect playing out over weeks and months. She was honest when honesty cost her nothing, and she was honest when it could have cost her everything. That consistency is what built the trust. That's what changed how the people around her treated her. You can't manufacture that kind of reputation. You either show up that way or you don't, and eventually the world starts to reflect it back. And then there's what she noticed. Not just the vendor discrepancy, though that mattered, but everything. The elderly guest who needed to talk about his wife for exactly as long as he needed. The dog's name she'd overheard once and filed away. The stress fracture in a metal chair that most people would have sat on without a second thought. Wren paid attention to the world around her, with a consistency and a precision that had nothing to do with formal training, and everything to do with the kind of mind that finds people genuinely interesting. That's a form of intelligence that doesn't always get recognized because it doesn't come with credentials, but it compounds. Every small thing she noticed became something she could use, or something she could offer, or something that let her see a situation clearly when everyone else was operating on assumptions. What got to me most, though, was the chair. Because that moment, deciding to throw herself backward into concrete, alone, before anyone was coming, before she knew if anyone was coming, that took something you can't fake and can't borrow. She was scared. Her voice was shaking the whole time. She did it anyway. Not because she was brave in some abstract cinematic way, but because she'd spent 26 years being underestimated, being apologized to, being handed the wrong size uniform with an apologetic shrug, and she had decided at some point, not dramatically, just quietly and completely, that she was going to keep going regardless. That kind of persistence doesn't announce itself. It just shows up over and over, in the small decisions that nobody sees. I think about that combination. The integrity, the attention, the refusal to quit. And I think that's what Callum recognized. Not a type, not an aesthetic. A person who was entirely, stubbornly herself, under pressure and without an audience. That's rare enough to stop a man who thought he'd seen everything. It's rare enough to change a room.